Adama, why not choose from one of the good men that are coming for your hand in marriage? Listen, I am the only daughter of King Maduka. I was not born to kneel beside ordinary men. Adama, pride is sweet in the mouth, but bitter in the stomach. Bitter? Let it be bitter then. If he does not have royal blood, he should not have blood at all. I must marry a prince. I'm a princess and I'm not for a common man. Be careful what you speak. The forest have ears. Then you will be my wife. You are afraid of shadows, Ugoma. I am afraid of nothing.
Adama, pride is sweet in the mouth but bitter in the stomach. Ugoma's voice trembled as the evening wind rustled through the bush path. The sky was bleeding into dusk, and the trees stood like silent witnesses. Princess Adama stopped walking. Slowly, she turned to her friend, her eyes glittering with arrogance, her lips curling into a smile that carried both beauty and danger. Bitter, she repeated with a soft laugh. Let it be bitter then. I will marry only a prince. If he does not have royal blood, he should not have blood at all. The words fell heavily into the air. Ugoma's breath caught. Adama, do not speak like that, she whispered urgently. The evening listens. The forest listens. But Adama tossed her head, the beads in her hair clinking proudly. Let them listen, she said boldly. I am the only daughter of King Maduka. I was not born to kneel beside ordinary men. And that was the sentence that echoed beyond the trees. The wind stopped abruptly. The birds that had been chirping went silent. Even the leaves seemed frozen in place. Somewhere deep within the shadows of that forest, something ancient stirred. Long ago, Prince Namdi, son of a mighty ruler, had died in war before he could taste the sweetness of marriage. His body had returned to dust, but his desire had not. His spirit wandered restlessly, neither fully gone nor fully present, bound to longing and unfinished dreams. For years he drifted unseen, unheard, forgotten by the living. Until that moment. Until Adama's proud declaration pierced through the veil between words. He heard her. Every word. Every challenge. In the hollow darkness between the trees, a cold presence gathered itself. A faint whisper moved with the wind, low and chilling, calling around the branches like smoke. Then you will marry me. Ugoma suddenly shivered, rubbing her arms though the air had not grown cold. Did you feel that? She asked quietly. Adama paused for a second as a strange breeze brushed across her face, but she quickly dismissed it with a scoff. You are afraid of shadows, Ugoma, she said lightly. I am afraid of nothing. But the forest had heard. The ancestors had heard. And somewhere in the unseen, a wandering prince had just chosen his bride. Now, before we continue this powerful tale filled with deep lessons about pride, destiny, and the danger of careless wishes, take a moment to subscribe and support this channel so you never miss stories that touch the heart and awaken the spirit. And now, let us go back to where it all truly began. Before pride grew in her heart, before the forest answered her careless words, there was a palace filled with silent tears. King Maduka and Queen Ezin had everything a ruler could desire: wealth, land, loyal subjects, but their compound echoed with one painful absence: the laughter of a child. Year after year, the queen watched other women carry babies on their backs while her arms remained empty. At night, when the palace slept, she would sit beside the oil lamp and whisper, "My king, what is a throne without a child to inherit it?" King Maduka, strong before his people, would lower his voice in private. The gods will remember us, Ezin. They must. Sacrifices were made at the shrines. White goats were offered. Kola nuts were broken with trembling hands. At dawn, before the cock crowed, the queen would kneel on the cold earth and pray in hushed desperation, "Ancestors, do not let my womb be a closed door." Seasons passed. Hope thinned. Then one morning, when the harmattan breeze still lingered softly in the air, a cry pierced through the palace walls, the cry of a newborn child. Queen Ezin wept as the midwife lifted the baby high. "It is a girl, my queen. A beautiful girl." King Maduka rushed in, his royal composure forgotten. When he saw the child, tiny and radiant, he fell to his knees. "The gods have answered," he whispered, his voice breaking. The kingdom erupted in celebration. For 7 market days, drums thundered across the land. Dancers filled the palace courtyard. Palm wine flowed like a river. Women ululated until their voices turned hoarse. "The princess is born," they shouted. The air of joy. King Maduka carried the child before his people, pride shining in his eyes. "Her name is Adama," he declared loudly. "The beautiful daughter of the people." Then, lifting her gently toward the sky, he made a vow that would shape her destiny. She will lack nothing. Not even the sun would dare shine without her permission. And the crowd roared in agreement. Not knowing that sometimes, when a child is given everything, the world forgets to teach them humility. Adama did not grow like other children, she blossomed inside silk and ceremony. From the moment she could walk, coral beads rested upon her neck, tiny wrappers of the finest fabric wrapped around her waist, and praise singers followed her footsteps as though she were already a queen. "Ada Oni, light of the kingdom," they would chant, and she would smile, believing every word. She never fetched water from the stream, the clay pots arrived filled before she even felt thirst. She never swept a room, the floors shone before her feet touched them. If she dropped a bracelet, 10 maids rushed forward at once, nearly colliding in their desperation to retrieve it. "Careful," one would hiss to another. "Do you want trouble?" If she so much as frowned, the entire chamber stiffened. A single crease on her forehead could send grown women into panic. And truly, she was stunning, skin dark and luminous like polished ebony under sunlight, eyes sharp and bright like burning coal, lips soft but often curved with superiority. Her voice flowed like honey, smooth and captivating, yet it carried an edge that could cut like a blade. The maids feared her more than they feared thunder cracking across the sky. One afternoon, as a young maid carefully braided her hair, Adama suddenly winced. "Oh, are your fingers made of wood?" she snapped, jerking her head away. The poor girl fell to her knees immediately. "Forgive me, my princess, forgive me." Another evening, when a meal was brought before her and the steam had slightly faded, Adama pushed the tray away with irritation. "Do you want me to eat like a common farmer?" she demanded coldly. The serving maid trembled so violently that the soup nearly spilled. In the kitchen corner, old Nwakigo, the palace cook whose back had bent with age and years of service, would shake her head slowly and mutter under her breath, "This child will one day insult the wind, and it will answer her." But Adama never heard those whispers, for in her world, she was not just a princess, she was the center of it. Time moved swiftly, and the little girl wrapped in silk grew into a woman whose beauty could silence a crowded square. When Adama came of age, the palace transformed into a place of expectation. The royal drummers stood at the marketplace and beat their drums with authority, their voices rising above the rhythm. "Hear ye! Hear ye! The princess is ready. Suitors may now approach." The announcement traveled across villages and beyond rivers. Chiefs adjusted their robes. Warriors polished their spears. Wealthy traders counted their riches. Princes prepared their escorts. They came in numbers, filling the palace courtyard with gifts, livestock, and promises. The first to step forward boldly was a fearless warrior named Obina, tall and broad-shouldered, his spear gleaming in the sun. He knelt confidently before her. "Princess Adama," he began, his voice strong, "I have fought battles and conquered enemies. I wish to conquer your heart and make you my queen." Adama stared at him from her elevated seat, then slowly, she laughed. It was soft at first, then sharper. "Your spear," she said coolly, "is taller than your ambition." The courtyard fell silent. Obina's jaw tightened, but he rose without another word, humiliation burning in his eyes. Next came Chokudi, son of a wealthy chief, his servants driving 20 healthy cows into the palace grounds. The animals mooed loudly, dust rising around them. He bowed with a proud smile. My princess, I bring these as a token of my seriousness and my wealth. I wish to take you as my wife. Adama glanced at the cows, then back at him, her lips curling slightly. Are you buying a wife, she asked sharply, or a goat? A ripple of uneasy laughter spread among onlookers. Chukwudi's smile faded as though someone had wiped it away. He signaled his servants. And the cows were led out as he departed in disgrace. Then came Emeka, a humble prince from a neighboring land, dressed modestly but with quiet dignity. He bowed respectfully. Princess, I do not come with many words. I come with honor and the promise to cherish you. Before he could continue, Adama lifted her hand dismissively. Your kingdom, she interrupted, her voice dripping with contempt, is smaller than my father's goat pen. A collective gasp filled the air. Emeka's face paled, but he bowed once more and turned away without protest. One by one, the men left wounded, not by weapons, but by words. And soon, beyond the palace walls, the kingdom began to whisper. Her beauty is a blessing, some said. But her pride, others murmured carefully, her pride will invite trouble. Among all who feared or flattered Adama, there was only one who dared to speak truth without trembling, her childhood friend, Ugoma. Ugoma was the daughter of a wealthy chief, yet humility clothed her more beautifully than gold ever could. She greeted elders properly, lowered her voice when necessary, and carried wisdom in her young heart. Many evenings, the two friends would walk along the quiet bush path just beyond the palace walls, where the air was cooler and the world felt less royal. On one such evening, as the sun melted slowly into the horizon and the trees cast long shadows across their path, Ugoma finally gathered the courage to speak. She looked at Adama carefully and said, her tone gentle but serious, Adama, pride is sweet in the mouth but bitter in the stomach. Adama stopped and turned to her, amusement dancing in her bright eyes. Bitter, she repeated with a soft laugh. Let it be bitter then. Ugoma sighed. You have turned away good men. Not all greatness shouts its name. But Adama lifted her chin higher, her beads glinting faintly in the fading light. Listen to me well, she declared boldly. I will marry only a prince. If he does not have royal blood, he should not have blood at all. The words left her lips carelessly, but they did not fall to the ground. They rose. They traveled. And that was the sentence that echoed beyond the trees. The evening grew strangely still. Even the insects seemed to pause. Deep within the unseen corners of the world, where memories of the dead linger like unfinished songs, something stirred. Long ago, Prince Namdi, son of a mighty ruler, had fallen in war before he could claim a bride. His life ended on the battlefield, but his longing did not die with him. He had never married. He had never known the warmth of a wife beside him. And so his spirit wandered, restless and incomplete, caught between what was and what could have been. When Adama's proud declaration pierced the silence of the living world, he heard it. Every word. Every challenge. In the cold hollow between ancient trees, a presence gathered like mist. A voice, dry and distant, slipped into the wind and moved unseen toward her. Then you will marry me. Ugoma suddenly felt a chill brush against her skin, though the air had not changed. She wrapped her arms around herself. Did you feel that? She whispered uneasily. But Adama only scoffed lightly and continued walking, unaware that her wish had just been answered. In the realm where the living do not tread and the dead do not fully rest, Namdi sank to his knees before the ancestral spirits. The air around him shimmered with ancient presence, voices layered upon voices, old as time itself. He bowed his head low, his once proud warrior spirit now heavy with longing. Great ancestors, he pleaded, his voice echoing like wine through a hollow cave, I died with my sword in my hand but emptiness in my heart. I never knew the warmth of a wife. I never heard a woman call me her husband. Let me feel marriage, even for a moment. The spirits murmured among themselves, their tones rising and falling like distant thunder. For a long while, they did not answer. Then one voice, deeper than the rest, spoke with authority. Namdi, son of a mighty ruler, what you ask touches the boundary between worlds. Another voice followed, stern and unyielding. If we grant this desire, you will receive flesh again. You will walk as a man. You will be given beauty, warmth, and breath. Namdi lifted his head slightly, hope flickering in his hollow eyes. But the spirits were not finished. Elders shall escort you for the marriage rites, so no suspicion will rise. You will appear complete. You will appear worthy. A sudden stillness fell before the final warning was given. But once you enter the forest after the marriage, once you step beyond the eyes of men, your borrowed flesh will vanish piece by piece. Your beauty will fade. Your body will return to what it truly is. The elders will disappear. You will stand as you are, nothing but bone and spirit. The words hung heavily in the unseen air. Namdi did not tremble. He did not hesitate. Even if it is for a single night, he said firmly, let me know what it feels like to be chosen. Silence followed. Then, slowly, the spirits withdrew. The bargain was sealed. And so the ghost prince rose. Flesh wrapped around bone. Warmth filled what had once been emptiness. His skin became polished and dark, glowing beneath the sun like burnished bronze. His shoulders broadened, his stance powerful and commanding. When he inhaled, it was as though the world itself paused to watch. His voice, once a whisper of wind, became deep and resonant, carrying the authority of royalty. As he stepped into the world of the living, even the birds seemed to halt mid-song. Women who caught sight of him gasped softly, their eyes widening in disbelief. Who gave birth to this son? They whispered among themselves, unable to look away. And somewhere beyond their admiration, destiny waited patiently for its hour. When Adama first laid eyes on him, the world tilted. The proud princess who had dismissed warriors and mocked princes felt her breath catch in her throat. Namdi stood tall in the palace courtyard, radiant beneath the sun, his polished dark skin glowing as though light lived inside him. His shoulders were broad, his gaze steady, his presence commanding without effort. For the first time in her life, Adama did not look down on a man, she looked up. Her fingers tightened slightly around her coral beads as she leaned toward her maid and whispered, barely able to contain the urgency in her voice, if he lives, I will follow him. The maid's eyes widened in shock, but Adama did not care. Her pride, once taller than the palace walls, softened like wax before flame. King Maduka watched the scene with overwhelming joy swelling in his chest. At last, he muttered happily to himself, my daughter has chosen. His excitement drowned caution. He did not ask the questions a king should ask. He did not send men to investigate lineage or land. He saw royalty in Namdi's bearing and that was enough. Queen Ezin, however, looked more carefully. When Namdi's eyes met hers, she felt it, a strange coldness buried deep within their depths, like a shadow passing quickly over clear water. She held his gaze a second longer than necessary, her mother's instinct whispering softly, but the courtyard erupted in celebration before her doubts could find words, and she silenced herself. Preparations unfolded in splendor. The finest fabrics were brought out, rich and heavy with embroidery. Coral beads were stacked high upon Adama's neck and wrist until she shimmered with royal elegance. She glowed like fire, every step deliberate, every smile triumphant. And beside her stood Namdi, impossibly handsome, every inch the prince she had demanded from the heavens. Even old Mokigo, stubborn and rarely impressed, leaned on her staff and squinted at him before shaking her head in disbelief. If beauty were palm wine, she muttered loudly enough for those nearby to hear, this man is the full keg. Laughter rippled through the gathering crowd. Young girls stared openly, some clutching their chests dramatically as though struck by invisible arrows. One fainted outright, and her friends rushed to fan her. Young men stood at the edges of the celebration, envy tightening their jaws. The drummers beat their instruments with thunderous pride, the rhythm vibrating through the earth itself. Songs filled the air. Cheers rose high. But in the midst of admiration and noise, no one paid attention to the elders who had escorted Nnamdi, men whose faces were stern, whose eyes did not blink, whose expressions never shifted. They stood too still, too silent. And no one noticed. After the celebrations faded and the drums no longer shook the palace walls, Adama followed her husband through the winding paths that led toward the forest. Her heart raced with excitement and curiosity, yet a strange tension tugged at her chest. As they reached the forest entrance, Nnamdi stopped and turned to her maids who had accompanied them. His voice was calm, steady, but carried an unshakable authority. "Your journey ends here," he said. "My people will take over." The maids hesitated, glancing at each other, but then stepped back, disappearing quietly into the shadows. Adama's stomach tightened. Fear whispered in her mind, but her pride pressed her lips shut. She would not show weakness. She would not hesitate. Hand in hand with Nnamdi, she stepped forward into the forest, the air cooler here, the canopy thick above, sunlight only a soft memory through the leaves. As they walked deeper, her eyes flicked to the elders who had come with them, guiding silently, ensuring every step was safe. But then, without a sound, one elder vanished. She blinked rapidly, thinking her eyes deceived her. Then another elder disappeared in the same manner, leaving nothing behind but an empty space. Her whisper trembled as it slipped into the shadows. "Did you see that?" Nnamdi looked at her, his lips curving into a faint, almost amused smile. "They returned home," he said softly. Yet there was no comfort in his tone, only certainty, and Adama's breathing grew uneven, the tightness in her chest blossoming into fear she could not name. The forest seemed to close around her, and the path ahead was darker than she had expected, but still she followed him, unable to stop, unable to turn back. As they moved deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, heavier, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Adama looked at Nnamdi and froze. His fingers, strong and warm just moments ago, began to fade before her eyes. She screamed, a sound that tore through the silent canopy. "No! What is this?" she cried, clutching his hand, but the flesh slipped through her grip like mist. His arm vanished next, leaving only air where warmth had been. Tears sprang to her eyes, blinding her as she gasped, her voice breaking. His chest dissolved, the strong presence that had commanded hearts moments before now nothing more than shadows and echoes. Calmly, almost kindly, he spoke. "You wished for a prince." Adama fell to her knees, her sobs racking her body. "Take me back. Please. I beg you." But his voice, steady and unyielding, answered her sorrow. "Be careful what your tongue commands." Panic seized her heart as every last trace of flesh disappeared, until finally, Adama's fear erupted into flight. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, branches tearing her wrapper, thorns cutting deep into her feet. Behind her, the skeleton laughed, a sound hollow, cold, and merciless. She stumbled, trying to escape, and in a desperate misstep struck her head hard against a low branch. Pain exploded through her skull, and then darkness swallowed her completely, her screams lost to the forest that had witnessed it all. Back at the palace, the celebration had ended, but King Maduka could not shake the unease creeping into his chest. A cold dread settled over him like a heavy cloak, and his hands clenched the arms of his throne. He realized, with a terror that struck deeper than any battlefield wound, that he had never asked about the prince's lineage, never sent men to confirm who this man truly was. He had married his daughter to a stranger, a shadow draped in flesh and charm, and now the forest had swallowed them both. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded, his voice raw, echoing through the empty hall. Queen Ezin pressed a hand to his arm, but even her presence could not soothe the rising panic. Guards were summoned at once. Torches lit, swords drawn, they moved quickly, taking one of Adama's remaining mates to show them the path she had taken. Call her name. Do not stop calling, the king shouted, his voice cracking. Through the night, their shouts pierced the darkness, carrying hope and fear in equal measure. Adama. Princess. Where are you? The forest swallowed their voices, replying only with rustling leaves and distant cries of night creatures. And then, as dawn broke, painting the horizon with pale gold, they found her lying unconscious among the branches and thorns, her wrapper torn, her small body bruised but still breathing. Relief surged, but it was tempered by the memory of what had happened. The guards lifted her gently, carrying her back through the forest, the first light catching the blood and dirt in her hair. The silent promise that the worst had passed, for now. Back at the palace, Adama was carried into the cool room where the village healer Dibia Ifoni waited. His hands moved swiftly, skillfully, grinding herbs into fine powders, mixing them with water and fragrant oils. Smoke began to rise from the earthen pot, curling in thick spirals around the room, filling every corner with the scent of roots and fire. Queen Ezin wept openly, her hands trembling as she clutched her daughter's bruised arms. Adama, my child, open your eyes, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Then, with a sudden gasp, Adama woke, screaming, her voice sharp and filled with horror. He has no flesh. He has no flesh. The words stumbled from her mouth in ragged bursts as she recounted everything, the forest, the elders, the vanishing of his body piece by piece, the skeleton laughing behind her, the thorns, the darkness following her. Tears ran freely down her cheeks, soaking the fine fabrics she had worn just hours before. My pride, she sobbed, her voice small and broken, my pride almost buried me alive. She fell to her knees before her parents, her forehead pressed to the cool floor, begging forgiveness. Forgive me, father. Forgive me, mother. I was foolish, and I see now how arrogance can destroy. She turned to the maids who had served her all her life, her voice trembling. I am sorry. I should have respected you. Thank you for staying. Old Nwakigo, the palace cook who had endured years of Adama's sharp tongue, blinked in disbelief, then fainted outright when Adama's lips whispered softly but clearly, "Thank you." The palace, once filled with pride and celebration, now held only relief, repentance, and the quiet lessons of humility. King Maduka rose from his throne, his voice strong and commanding, yet filled with relief and gratitude. Let there be a feast. Let the drums thunder and the horns sound. We give thanks to the gods for the life of my daughter, for her safe return, for the mercy that has spared us. Torches were lit, tables laid with the finest foods, and sacrifices were prepared at the altars outside the palace. White goats and kola nuts were offered to the ancestors, prayers whispered into the wind, and incense smoke wound scoured in silent devotion. The palace erupted in celebration, laughter and music filling every hall and courtyard, a celebration not just of a daughter returned but of life itself, fragile and precious. Adama, once proud and unyielding, had changed. She became kinder, softer in her words, careful with her gaze, patient with her mates. She listened when elders spoke, greeting them properly, bowing with humility she had never known before. Suitors, who had once fled her sharp tongue, returned cautiously, with respect, observing the new wisdom in her eyes. And as the drums beat on and the incense curled into the sky, a voice, low and resonant, seemed to speak through the very walls of the palace, a voice meant for those who would listen. Pride invites spirits. Words are seeds. The forest hears what the heart says carelessly. And sometimes, it answers.